Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the Mining Podcast. And today's guest is Michael Moore, who's the Managing Director of Golden State Mining, who are an ASX-listed exploration company based in Perth, Australia. And they've acquired a number of gold and base metal assets around Western Australia and looking to develop these in the near future. Michael's a mine engineer by background with an extensive experience in Western Australia. And he's also the director of the Campbell School of Mines in the UK. So it'd be good to discuss what is happening with some of the universities around the world suspending some of their mining courses and what impact this will have in the industry in the future. So I want to welcome Michael to the podcast. How you doing, Michael?
Great, Rob. Thanks for the invite. Good to come and talk to you.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you taking up your time as well. So yeah, as we always do these podcasts, I wondered if you can give the audience a brief background of yourself from way back to where you are present day, and I've got some sort of questions and discussions that we can have.
Well, it was interesting when I first went to the Campbell School of Mines. I was about one of the only few in my year that had actually decided to attend there. A lot of people had just ended up there through clearings. So for me, I'd always been around mining my whole life. So my father went to the Campbell School of Mines. He attended and graduated in the early 70s. My grandfather had been there pre-war. My great uncle had attended pre-war, and the family had a history of quarrying going back to the sort of the 1860s. They'd been involved in limestone quarrying in Devon predominantly through that particular period. So my father graduated, went and took up an assistant mine manager role on a copper mine in Cyprus. And so that's where I was born. So, for the first 5 years of my life, very much exposed, living on a mine site, him going to work every day, me as a sort of 4 or 5-year-old jumping in the old Series 2A Land Rover with him, bombing up the mine. So it was a really great environment and a really immersive environment for me. And, what's not to like about that sort of environment? It's massively dynamic, exciting, really interesting people involved, big equipment, explosives, blasting, just fantastic. And so from a very early age, I was pretty much hooked. And we subsequently moved to Ireland. He was involved in mining varieties there. And then, probably my late teens, decided that, absolutely, I was going to wanted to go to the Campbell School of Mines and study. But in that particular period of time in the 80s, obviously we'd seen a lot of mine closures, particularly in the coal industry. So when you sat at school as a teenager telling your careers master that you fancied a career in mining, everybody was very anti that. And nobody had any perception that it was really a viable industry. I mean, it's ludicrous to think that now, but back then there was this sort of pervasive view that mining was on the wane and that there was no real future in mining. I mean, that may well have been the case in the UK, but how many of those Campbell graduates over the last sort of 130 odd years have remained in the UK? Mostly people went to Campbell and it was a ticket to overseas and adventure. So it was a bit of a difficult time convincing people that that's something that I felt was a career. A lot of people were trying to sort of convince me to consider something else, but I persisted with it and started at Campbell in the 90s and graduated in 1999. So it was a good period of time just post Exeter University getting involved, and very dynamic time at Campbell at that particular time, but very much enjoyed my time there, and also had the opportunity to get some work experience in Australia, which is ultimately where I've found myself pursuing a career. And what I realized as soon as I got here off the plane to do work experience with Hammersley Iron, as it was part of Rio Tinto, big iron ore mine here in Western Australia, Tom Price, I realized there was a local newspaper that was full of mining jobs. And of course, in the UK, nothing like that. You might see the odd mining job appear in a newspaper for some far off land, but to arrive somewhere where there were 4 or 5 pages chock full of mining jobs, I had ideas of maybe going to South America once I graduated. But as soon as I saw and arrived here in Perth and realized what an important part of the economy it was and how many opportunities there were, for me, my mind was made up. As soon as I graduated, it was a case of getting a working holiday visa and getting here as quickly as I could.
You mentioned obviously your father being in the mining industry. And obviously that's what brought you into the industry. How about any other family members, friends? Were they involved in mining? Did you encourage them to get into mining because they saw you, obviously people that you may have grown up with? Did any of them sort of follow you as well? So you having an influence on your friends by you doing, and this could be from your age of 5 up to when you left school, because you were involved in the mining industry. Were you promoting that to people of your age and also your family? Did they promote that to their friends at all?
Well, it's interesting because when I was at school, if you said your father was a mining engineer, to me it seemed the most exotic thing that he could possibly be, because I'd never met another kid whose father was involved in the mining business ever. And so it was very, very unusual, and it wasn't like I was rubbing shoulders with people who were part of the industry. So my father died when I was 13. So in terms of getting any, leadership guidance and encouragement from him, well, that effectively evaporated when he died. So apart from my uncle being an archaeologist, that was about as close as any family member was to, digging holes in the ground in that respect. But it was just this, what we find, Rob, with respect to our sector, is there is an inherent amount of ignorance in society with respect to what we do. What we do tends to happen out of sight, out of mind in these far off destinations, be it Africa, South America, the wilds of Canada, the bush in Australia. So it's not something that the everyday person is exposed to. And even people here in Australia, where it's a massive part of the economy, if you go to Melbourne or Sydney, again, there's quite a significant level of ignorance with respect to our sector and what it delivers and how important it is to modern day life. So for me, it's a massive frustration. I remember at school when I was I was first year to do GCSEs, and in geography, the teacher let us know that the next period, in the following week, we would be looking at various things in the lesson, but mining was going to be part of that. And I was so excited because it was something that I was passionate about. Sourced lots of old photographs from home of mines and where my dad had been and bits and pieces, and sort of arrived at the lesson prepped, ready to sort of give them the full barrel. And it was effectively 2 or 3 minutes of the lesson, and I couldn't believe it. And so something that's as important as our sector doesn't get covered, in kids' curriculums. And really, they should be understanding from a very early age, when they're at kindy in the sandpit, what it means when you're, digging holes with a Tonka truck, an excavator, and how that plays out in real life, and how, our modern society is founded on, mining and the materials that are produced. So for me, that's a massive frustration. I guess later on we might talk about that impact and that ignorance and how that's played out in terms of graduate numbers for the mining schools, and how that ultimately is going to hamper the mining sector. And there's going to be this sort of almighty fight for the very few graduates that are produced, and in the long run, that has a detrimental impact on the performance of the mining companies when you don't have people who are passionate about their career and their specialized subject, being mining, geology, mineral processing. If you don't have these people in your businesses, it's very difficult to convert mechanical engineers and chemical engineers and dial them into what's important in the mining scene. So growing up, there was definitely a lack of of mentors or of encouragement, because it simply wasn't part of our day-to-day lives in the UK, other than the bad news, be it a mining disaster or the closure of pits. So a very difficult situation.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I asked that question, and I suppose with what's happening with, and again we'll speak about this a bit later, around universities and attracting people into the industry. At that age, when you were involved in mining, if there was a lot of people that are mining professionals in the industry, if they have family, what you could potentially do is sort of encourage your children to go into the industry, which probably most people do, but also encourage those children to speak to other people about the exciting things that they're doing. So it's just like that spreading goodwill of what mining is at a very early age. So I just think it's something that potentially could help, and that's the reason why I asked that question.
There's a misconception in society. There's a lack of people that people just aren't informed about mining, and so often there is criticism that's leveled at the mining sector every now and then when there's an adverse outcome. It might be an environmental spill, or it might be a sort of an issue around heritage or social license to operate. And so a lot of people, and quite rightly, want to get stuck in and have their 10 cents worth in terms of trying to hold these mining companies to account, these businesses to account. But they're often doing it from a position of genuine ignorance, and that's not their fault. It's just not something that they know too much about. Or I'd much rather be held to account by people who have at least a simple understanding of the sector and its importance. And what we want to do is we want to train young geologists, engineers, and mineral processors, and have them very much aware of what modern society expects of mining business. Firstly, modern society has to accept that mining is warranted. It is necessary if we want to maintain the lifestyles that we have, that we want to keep advancing, and we want a lean and renewable and clean economy. Then the mining business needs to deliver those minerals, metals into that stream in order that we can have that. So people have got to understand the importance of mining and understand how it operates. And then when there are instances where we as a mining business fail, we're being held to account by people who actually understand the importance of the business and how we should be really doing better. And that's the most important thing, I think. But what we want to do is we want to train engineers and geologists. They've got to understand about environmental factors. They've got to understand the importance now of mine closure, of rehabilitation, ESG, governance, social license to operate. So things that were never discussed, when I was studying mining engineering, but now is very, very important. As an exploration business, heritage and social license to operate is massively important to us. The custodians of the land here, the Aboriginals here, we have to have a relationship with those guys. Effectively, we need their approval to be operating on their traditional lands. So for me, it's very, very important, and I get that. But what we want to do is to produce graduates who absolutely understand that. So when they go and make their way in the world and they're operating in these mining businesses, they're very conscious of those requirements. It's also very important for mining businesses, to be fully engaged in this arena, because investor groups are very focused on that, how a company is operating in respect to ESG. And if you don't make the grade, businesses, these groups will not invest in you. And that's a real challenge for some mining businesses. So if we're producing graduates who are very much aligned to those expectations and understand the full process, then we will be operating a much more socially acceptable mining industry, one that's very much accepted for the good that it delivers, and is doing the right thing in terms of the communities in which we operate, and is doing the right thing in terms of rehabilitating these sites back to useful and productive ground once we've finished with those operations. I mean, a mine is not a sustainable business. A mining business can be a sustainable business, and it's how we open and close these. And if we do it in a manner that's acceptable to society, then we've got a great mandate then.
Yeah. Obviously, speaking about graduates, and as you're the director of the Campbell School of Mines, if you can go back to when you actually got your first position, how did you go about getting your first job? And also, what advice would you give graduates in trying to find their first job? Obviously, we get quite a few graduates listening to this podcast. I get a lot of graduates approaching myself as well. So I just wonder what your thoughts are around that. Obviously, because you are a mine engineer and you got your first position, and also because you're part of the Campbell School of Mines. I just wonder what advice you could give.
Well, I remember probably way back in 1998, Dennis Thomas, who's a bit of a stalwart of the mining recruitment sector in the UK. Dennis actually studied at Campbell with my father. They both played rugby there. And Dennis came down to the Campbell School of Mines. I think he put a barrel of beer on at the club, and decided, was talking about his career. And of course, we as soon-to-be graduates, we're really keen to hear him and get some advice from him on that first important job. So my question to Dennis that evening was, the importance of that first role. How is that going to establish you and set you on a particular path in your career? And Dennis gave me this piece of advice, and I've never forgotten it. He said, don't be worried about that first job. Just take the first job that pays. The first gig that's remotely, related to your discipline and the industry, because it by no way, it does not set your career path. That will come later on in life. So just take that first job, get that employment, and get that experience. And I've said that to many a graduate that's arrived here, because sometimes people, the modern graduates are overthinking it. They're already thinking about where they want to be in 40 years' time and how we can shortcut that route. And so they place a great deal of importance on that first role. Well, that first role is not that important. It's easier to get your second role once you've got the first role. That first job is just about getting something on your resume, something that's remotely related to your discipline, ideally, if that's your passion. And then that will then set you up for getting the next job. It's always much easier getting a job when you've already got one.
Yeah.
But I, like you, we get a lot of graduates coming here to Australia, and I just got a year working holiday visa once I graduated. Sold everything I owned in the UK, put it all in put the remains in a backpack, and came here. And what was the best thing for me was the old Camborne network. I arrived here, hooked up with a guy I used to play rugby with. We all shared a house. He'd been out here for 3 or 4 years working, got some part-time work from him, and then ultimately managed to secure a full-time position with that particular company. It wasn't easy. Gold price was really in the toilet in 2000 when I was here, but managed to score a job, got sponsorship, and so that secured my position here for 4 years. And it was just effectively dog's body project engineer in the days, just before computers were the go. So I started off with a phone on the desk and a fax machine and got about my business that way. But people do worry about that first role. And I say, look, it's not important. It doesn't matter what you do. You just get out there and get the experience. But for coming out to Australia, obviously in the COVID times, it's a little bit different. But generally, my advice to people has been get here, get a working holiday visa, come to Perth, give Perth 6 weeks when you're running around with resumes and trying to get something. And if it doesn't work out, you get on the train to Kalgoorlie with your resume, and guaranteed within a week or two, you will have something. Because if you've had the get up and go to buy your rail ticket to Kalgoorlie and do the rounds up there, it demonstrates a willingness on your part to get on and really make a career for yourself. And so that's always my advice. Don't sit back in Perth waiting for the world to come to you. You go out there and find it. And depending on how the mining minerals markets are running, sometimes it's a little bit more difficult than others. There were times when people were literally arriving off the plane and walking into really high paid jobs. Again, that would be the case right now, but COVID is restricting people's free movement. But a lot of graduates are sitting there in the UK right now, primed and ready to come. And my advice is just wait till the border opens and then just jump on the plane. And that's the only way to do it.
Yeah, no, that's some great advice there. And myself, I used to live in Australia, so I know what a great country that is. I lived out there for 10 years. So anyone thinking about taking that first big step to Australia, I would definitely do it. But moving on from that, and especially, I suppose I'm talking about graduates, say from the Campbell School of Mines or maybe another university here in the UK, if they're not in a position to go overseas or to move to Australia or attempt to try and get work in Australia, what advice would you give them? Obviously, if anyone approaches me about how to get their first job, I do give them a few different options. I do say to them, look, have a look at opportunities in Australia. But if they're in a position that they're not able to do that for whatever reason, what other advice would you give them to seek opportunities?
Depends where they're prepared to go. But I always think if you're going to undertake a mining degree, that you've got to have an inherent sense of adventure And it was very interesting. A number of years ago, a local graduate from the Camborne School of Mines, grown up in Cornwall, came here to Australia to get his career kick-started. But I ended up having a conversation with him 4 or 5 months into his initial 12 months, and it was obvious that it wasn't for him. This environment out here wasn't for him. Obviously, the mining environment here depends on fly in, fly out. It's not everybody's cup of tea. It can be very, very challenging on relationships. You're stuck out on mine sites for reasonable periods of time. It's sort of part of the culture here, but it's very different to how we might operate in the UK if you were working for a tunneling business. Although in some instances in tunneling and civil engineering, you're required to work away from home. But if you're going to make the most of a degree at Camborne, in the old days, of course, it was your ticket to adventure and overseas travel. But sometimes people used to get that experience overseas and they might return to the UK to take up consultancy roles, so that was often, what people did. They might end up back in Cornwall and utilizing all of that experience that they gained in their career overseas to assist, aspirational, exploration of mining companies, deliver basically. But there's still a lot of, there was a time in the 80s at Camborne where mining was a tough time, and a lot of the graduates either went to the North Sea and got into the oil business, and then there was a significant cohort that when the Channel Tunnel was on, all went into tunneling, and there's a big section of the Camborne sort of mafia, as it were, that from the late 80s to the very early 90s were working on these big tunneling jobs, and particularly the Channel Tunnel, and they've remained in that. And there are lots of them here. They then went to Hong Kong and spent most of the 90s in Hong Kong. And then they've been down here for probably the last decade doing big projects in Sydney and Melbourne. The one thing about mining, I would say, is that, it opens up a massive world of opportunity, because you not only got, your civil engineering, offshore engineering, you've got exploration, you've got processing, but a lot of guys end up in finance, mining finance, insurance, loss adjusting. It's amazing where a mining degree, which is very varied in terms of engineering, you're almost a jack of all trades. It's a very, very broad course that you study, means that you find a place in many, many different areas, associated with engineering, and it might be quarrying, the civil engineering side of things. So I think it's a very, very good degree, and a lot of the people who've been there have been very, very successful, because it is a very robust degree and opens up so many opportunities.
Yeah, I want to slightly move off subject now, but I will come back to obviously talk about the Camborne School of Mines degrees, etc. Obviously, you're the managing director of Golden State Mining, and you listed just over 2 years ago. How are things going, and how are things playing out?
Well, we listed November 2018, and it was a rotten time in the market. It was really difficult. There wasn't very much free, flowing money available for IPOs at that time. I think we were about one of the last of 2018 to get away. It was a real struggle to raise 4.5 million. If we'd been doing it this year, it wouldn't have been difficult at all. We probably could have raised 2 or 3 times what we raised back then, but we got it away, and it was great to get it away in difficult circumstances, because it meant we really had to graft for those funds. And we were reasonably well supported by a particular broking house called Hartley's. They raised 2 out of the 4.5, but the balance we pretty much raised ourselves through our own networks, and relationships that we had with people, trying to prize money out of everybody's hands so that we could get this opportunity away. And we listed it, as I said, at a very tough time in the market, but it was a very tight capital structure. So we raised 4.5 million, and at that time we only had 36 million shares on issue, which is quite unusual for an exploration company to be so tight, because we hadn't spread a lot of cheap shares around, and we hadn't overdone it in terms of giving the directors too many shares. So everybody was really focused on actually delivering with the assets that we had. So this last 8 to 10 months has been it's been easier in the market because suddenly investors were dialed in. We had some quite significant, greenfields discoveries here in Australia, a couple of key discoveries here in Western Australia, a business called Chalice, and another company called De Grey, that really lit the flames, fanned the flames of the market. People suddenly remembered that you could be invested in a junior stock and it could be 10 or 20 times in a very short period of time if they got onto a genuine discovery. And there was a lot going on in New South Wales, Lachlan Fold Belt, again, some really good stories developing out of there. So people suddenly realized that there were credible companies with good crown positions, good technical people who were very much focused on getting dollars into the ground to try and identify an ore body and liberate value. And so I think there was a renewed faith that the sector, although, it's a bit like gambling, the odds are pretty ordinary, but you can shortcut those odds, pick good jurisdictions, good technical teams, well-funded companies, and you can really shorten those odds. And people came back to our sector and wanted to invest money. And we raised money again this year, raised another 2.5 million, and we pretty much deployed that throughout this whole year. We've been drilling air core in an area that's very much under focus because our next door neighbours thankfully have made a monster discovery, but we put nearly 30,000 meters of air core into our tent. We've got 700 square Ks in the Pilbara. So we've been a very active business, and that's part of keeping the shareholders engaged. And then when we listed the company, people gave us money and said, go spend it. Don't sit back and, keep it in the bank. We want, because if you're not drilling, you haven't got a hope. So they literally gave us the money, understood the very high risk, but high reward opportunity that companies in our end of the sector represent. And they said, go spend the money, and go do good technical work. And that's what we've been doing basically for 2 years.
Yeah. So what actually drew you to the junior exploration space?
I'm not sure, Rob. I thought that I might end up following in the footsteps of my father, perhaps, my manager. That to me, as I was growing up, seemed like a really amazing sort of role. But I was involved in contracting probably for the first 5 years of my career here, and then spotted a project management role with a wannabe mineral sands producer with a project in West Africa. And really, it was a project management role, but I quite liked the idea of that. It seemed a little bit more exotic than what I'd been doing here in Western Australia. And that was my first exposure to the junior mining sector. And I spent probably 18 months involved in that. It was really interesting, amazing dealing with, we had a 50-50 JV partner, Chinese. That was interesting culturally. I learned a lot there, went up, visited China, involved in, obviously, in a West African jurisdiction, dealing with, the Office of Geology. So under the president of the Gambia, the Office of Geology, dealing with sort of junior ministers, all of that, tribal chiefs, a little bit of everything. And I realized that I really liked that environment and that dynamic and the people and the variety. You're dealing with everybody from sometimes people in our sector, you're dealing with the president of a country one day and you're chatting to the drillers offside of the next day. And, and I really liked that. So I spent 18 months, but then I got tempted back again with a really technical job in the contracting field, a mine called Koolan Island, an iron ore mine here in Western Australia. So again, it was a really great technical challenge. But once I'd done that, I realized that I wanted to get back into the junior mining sector. That sort of entrepreneurial element of it and the diversity, the variety really, really drew me. And in the junior mining sector, it's, not necessarily, massively paid, but, if you make a discovery, wow, it can really transform your life and the life of others. And it's just, I guess it's about effectively you're a prospector, a bit like the old days when they were out bush, they were just looking for those gold nuggets. We're the same. The gear's a bit different, the environment's a bit different, but we're still out there, having a go. And I like that dynamic. And it's nice to be able to set a cultural agenda, and take key learnings of your business career and then apply that to a role like this. And hopefully you've learned some good things and you haven't picked up too many bad habits, and you can deploy that and hopefully create an environment where people really want to work and you get the chance to empower people. And I really love that. I mean, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I recognize and I enjoy working with really, really smart people. If we can create an environment where they can flourish, then hopefully ultimately that'll deliver success for us.
So what's the outlook for Golden State Mining, and what are you sort of looking to achieve, I suppose, over the next 5, maybe 10 years?
I think for us that's a long way down the track at the moment.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm thinking 5 or 10 weeks, because we're always trying to keep enough money in the enough treasury to support the next drill program.
Yeah.
But what you have to do is to materially advance your project technically at every stage, and that's what we're looking to do. And and with some of our projects, we're looking to monetize those. So we've got one project that we drilled. We had an aspiration for that. Unfortunately, the geology didn't ultimately support when we did the drilling, but that project can still deliver in terms of small scale mining and the reprocessing of tailings. So even though we may have spent a couple of $1 million on it, I'm hoping in the long term it'll deliver more than that. And it always had a fallback position, that project. So it always had shallow surface opportunities. The investors want a big return. They want a big discovery. So that little bit isn't necessarily sexy, but they're very happy if it delivers money back into our bank account and we don't have to issue more shares to raise money, and we can keep the capital structure of the business tight, because ultimately that's to their benefit. But we've been very lucky here that, as I was saying to you earlier, the last 12 months, a very, very good environment for those having a red hot go like us, and also for the producers, gold producers particularly, and iron ore producers. It's been great for this particular state. So a state founded on mining, Western Australia is still a great place to be. It's still a great place to operate because you know the rules and you know the regulations. It's well entrenched. You can come here, set up a company, and do business.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, somebody just dialed me in then.
Yeah.
So generally, I mean, so my outlook, for the next 5 or 10 years is mining is going to become more important. It really is. And in terms of where we want to take society, mining has a massive role to play in that. And it's great to be part of that. We just need to do more to highlight the positives. And we need to, as an industry, to get on the front foot and talk about all the good things and connect people from their everyday lives to the mining industry. And that's very, very easy. You show them a mobile phone. You can't have that without mining. You can't cook something in your microwave. You've got to drive to work in your car. Even if it's an EV, where do you think all the componentry for that comes? Mining has a significant role, and we just want people to recognize that. And we also want to do a better job of delivering that. And investors need to reward companies that are doing the right thing and steer clear of businesses that don't, and hold them to account, because there are plenty of businesses that operate in some third world jurisdictions, and they take advantage of that fact. Now, what we don't want people to be doing is investing in those businesses. We want companies who are operating wherever they're operating under first world rules and regulations and expectations. And that's the most important thing for credibility, I think, in our sector.
Yeah. Something that's been in the news more recently is, and we speak about, I suppose we can speak about the Campbell School Mines, but generally speaking, there's other universities as well. Obviously, the University of Exeter recently paused the recruitment onto the mining engineering degree at the Campbell School of Mines for 2021, so for next year. What's your take on that? And obviously, the Campbell School of Mines is not the only university out there that is cutting some of their courses for the coming year. There is other mines, school mines around the world, I think in Canada, Australia itself, and possibly others as well. And that's probably because of the lack of interest in those subjects, perhaps. there might be a lot of other things around that. What's your take on what's happening with some of these courses and some of these universities sort of cutting these off for next year?
I can understand it, but the problem is that if you don't promote something, then how do you expect people to find their way to your institution to study? So not only have the universities got an issue with I think outreach, the mining industry in general has an issue promoting itself, and it's not that well coordinated in terms of delivering that. And as I said to you, what we want is we want young people, and or anybody who's got an interest in studying a resources related discipline, to get the very best education and training, so that we're delivering people with the right skills into a mining industry that's very receptive for that. And the challenge has been is promoting that, and for people to understand that it is a viable career. And as you and I have discussed on this particular call, it's not just about mining. You can find a career in London, in Scotland, in Wales, wherever it happens to be. It doesn't have to be purely mining related, but the industry will be crying out for people. There's a challenge here in Australia. Again, a country that you would think would be overrun with people wanting to be mining engineers and geologists, and not so, because of a lack of reasonable promotion. And there was a challenge in the UK, whereas in the last few years, if you were interested in mining engineering and you went to search for institutions that offered a mining related course, it was almost impossible to find one. Administrative errors, those sorts of challenges, right hand not talking to the left hand. So it's really a case of promotion, but also I think it needs to be genuinely part of the school curriculum. People have got to understand the importance of mining and farming, to our modern way of life. Accept it is going to be part of ILF. We can do things better. And the more educated people are, the better off the whole sector will be as a consequence. And we just need people to be understanding and informed about what we do. And that's the biggest problem. The only reason I ended up at Camborne was because my dad was a mining engineer and I was around it. Otherwise, I just wouldn't have had that, never had that exposure. And particularly when I went to Camborne, a lot of the guys in those days came to CSM through clearing. A lot of people didn't want to be there and had no idea that there was a course that was available in mining engineering, but it was the only place that offered them a place. But we ended up with this really, really great mix of people that have gone out into the industry. And diversity is the key for our sector. What we don't want is some sort of homogenous output. We don't want sort of consistent A grade, triple A grade students come in, because we don't have that variety. And the sector needs people with all sorts of skills and strengths and weaknesses and likes. And that's important. And when I studied, we had people who were ex-army, a guy who'd been an underground air leg driller in the coal fields, decided he wanted to come and get an education. A guy from a boat building course. We had a fisherman. I mean, I don't think we get that sort of mix now, unfortunately. And that's we get strength from that. But there's just a lack of perception of the importance of mining in our sector. I'll give you an analogy. 18 months ago, I needed a new iPhone and I had some problems with it. And I took it to the Apple store here in Perth, the epicenter of mining in Australia. And I got an English guy. He was a DJ. We got chatting. And at the end of it, he said, look, you're in a business. We offer this free support service. Let me take your details. You don't have to use it, but if you want it, it's there. It's a name, details, company. And we got to the drop-down box that had the sectors which our business operated in. We dropped the drop-down box. Was there anywhere in that drop-down box for mining? No, there was not. Nothing related to mining, oil and gas.
And that's hard to believe, being in Australia as well. You can understand being in the UK, but in Australia,
you could understand that. But you would have thought that, maybe globally they considered that drop-down box, And I couldn't believe it. I mean, I was pulling his leg, but I said, this is an absolute disgrace. Here we are in the epicenter of mining, and we don't have a drop-down box for this. I said, what do you think that machine, that iPad that we're dealing with here is made of? How can a business like that, a global business like Apple, not have in their exhaustive drop-down box a position for my sector, a sector that they rely on for all their key componentry? I said, and that, Rob, in a nutshell, is the problem that we have.
That's a great example of the ignorance of I suppose the world and how they view mining. And it brings you back to the question I asked you originally when you said when you were growing up, you were obviously your father was in mining, and that's how comes you got into the industry. So I suppose one of the things I was trying to get at is people within our industry, mining people, they should really promote the industry to non-mining people. And that's whether it's younger children, people going, obviously children that go into school, and then obviously adults, but really promoting it to non-mining people and just telling them how wonderful the mining industry is. Obviously, it's going to take years and years and years, but that's a start. And that's something that's free and that will organically grow. So you mentioned obviously the education system. Now, obviously, for them to include that in the curriculum is going to be a long process, I imagine. But
look, it would be massively controversial, I think, that if you were to make that sort of suggestion, there would be a lot of people in the education community that would feel very uncomfortable about that. But I think we need to have those sorts of discussions. And it's a very real part of modern life. And so why are we sweeping it under the table and hiding it from young people as they grow up? Because they only grow up ignorant, and poorer as a consequence. What we want is people to grow up informed and understanding what our sector contributes and delivers. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we face as a sector. And there's also a collective apathy within our sector. We're not all on the front foot advocating for mining, and we forget what an amazing career and how rewarding it has been for us. And we neglect to sort of highlight to people every now and then some of the benefits and some of the great things about a career in our sector.
So what do you think, as mining professionals, what can you do to help the situation? Obviously, I mentioned one about obviously just informing people that are non-mining, just educating them around the industry. And again, that takes really a lot of time. Is there anything else, like obviously people listening to this podcast, what can we do to help part of this process? I mean, again, is it individuals that should be doing this? Is it mining companies? Is it both? Is it the government? But it can be everyone.
It's all of the above. But we at the Camborne School of Mines Association are grappling with this problem. How do we best coordinate that goodwill? And we're contemplating, do we need effectively a sort of a not-for-profit organization that works with, that is funded by mining companies in some way to provide better outreach and to better lobby and to encourage people to study, so that we can ensure that the mining schools remain sustainable and that the mining companies have a good supply of quality, well-educated graduates. That's the most important thing. But how? It's how do we coordinate all of that? And it does need somebody to manage that. And even at our level, it's we've got lots of graduates spread throughout the world, but how do we manage somebody going back to their school, delivering a presentation, doing a bit of a show and tell, as it were, for an hour or so, coordinating that, mapping it all out. It's something that I think we really need to think about, because at the moment it's just not working. There's little dribs and drabs happening, but it's not a coordinated approach. And I think we need that.
Yeah. So we just lastly on this subject, with obviously some universities pausing certain courses, whatever will happen in 2022, how's that going to affect the industry and the future? And is there anything we can do to help resolve this, or help with what other potential issues it can affect the industry moving forward?
Well, the graduates at the moment are being snapped up, and that there aren't enough to go around. When I'm hearing the numbers from mining companies of how many grads that they want, they're simply not there. Yeah. I mean, all the grads from Camborne, I think, have effectively been snapped up. There's one contracting company here in Perth that's taken 10 plus this year. I mean, there are not many more graduates available from Camborne, quite frankly. So it is a massive challenge. It needs to be on the agendas of boards of directors. They need to understand that this is a massive challenge that may not manifest itself fully for 5 or 10 years, but by then it's going to be too late. And of course, we will have a bit of a free-for-all whereby graduates and junior managers are being paid exorbitant salaries by companies that can afford it and pricing others out of the market, and we'll be all the poorer for it. I mean, I saw here in the boom times the quality of management and engineering outcomes fall significantly as a consequence of a sort of a rush to the bottom. Pay whatever it takes to get that person, and ultimately there just weren't enough people to go around with the right skills and the right experience. And that's what we will find. And mining operations won't perform as well. We'll be delivering, poorer outcomes in terms of, the environment, our social license to operate. And I think the industry needs to confront now that these traditional mining education institutions are a precious resource. And it's not just about funding them, Rob. It's about getting bums on seats. And, in the old days also, companies would identify talent from within the ranks and say, look, you're a great supervisor. We'd actually like you to go back and get a degree and come back and work your way up through the business. So we're going to send you to Camborne, or we're going to send you to the WA School of Mines or the Colorado School of Mines to get your degree. And you will come back here, with greater potential. So that doesn't happen. But collectively, it's about bums on seats and how we encourage graduates to join our sector. And Kirk Adams has produced 1 or 2 videos, about how exciting mining could be. We need that. The new generation are very stimulated. It's short, sharp videos, whether it's TikTok or whether it's Instagram, LinkedIn. We need to use those mediums to engage with those guys and say, look, you think that's exciting. You come and join our sector. It's on, and you need to be part of it.
Yeah, it's going on to my next question, because I was going to ask you what your thoughts on how we can actually attract young people into the industry, and what are some of the key drivers to achieving this?
Well, a lot of mines now, are going, remote. So, especially here in the Pilbara, Western Australia, a lot of the mines, remote equipment, haul trucks are running driverless trucks. So we've got these massive centres here in Perth where they're controlling, mine sites, 1,500 kilometres away. I mean, it's pretty amazing. And then, getting up to these sites and seeing that interaction with personnel and all this remote equipment. Resolute, Syama in Africa, those guys, effectively have fully remote underground mining operations, just fantastic. But there's still the opportunity for good old-fashioned adventure, Rob. Putting your boots on, getting a rucksack on, and getting out there and going to find an ore body. I mean, it's just fantastic. Again, that's that variety, but it's how we portray that.
Yeah.
And in the old days, it was publications, it was magazines. It ain't happening there anymore. We need to get on these platforms and get, and drive that agenda. And it is exciting. We all love it. We generally are pretty passionate about it, especially when we after work drinks and a group of us get together and we talk about the jobs that we have. There's never anything else that is really compared to it, I think, in terms of variety and excitement and the dynamism of it. We just need to convey that to this new generation. So, we need to work with people who understand it, who operate in that arena, and who deliver products into that generation. And we need to work with those people to better understand how we market our sector.
Yeah. As a conclusion, how would you sum up the mining industry at the moment, and what's the future?
I think we're at a pivotal time at the moment. I think that the sector is changing for the better. It's operating to a significantly higher standard and looks to exceed that on an annual basis. It's amazing how the mining sector here dealt with COVID, it was almost like a bump in the road because they were already set up. There are people in these organizations who are contemplating scenarios like this on a daily basis. And so when it happens, suddenly, they're relevant and they're there with all the solutions. And it may have been a little bit touch and go here, but the sector here has operated unhindered because it was prepared and ready to go. And probably the closest business to that might have been the military in terms of how they've executed operating in this particular environment. But I think the mining sector's well positioned, and there's no slowdown, Rob. In terms of EVs, renewables, storage, massive demand for specialty metals and copper particularly. And so and the sort of global financial uncertainty just plays the hand for the gold players. So there was a time maybe when I wasn't so optimistic, but I'm pretty optimistic now.
Yes, certainly. And I think the biggest challenge facing the industry is trying to find all these world-class deposits.
Yes.
And there's obviously a number of different commodities that are much needed, and especially with some of the governments, especially here in the UK, Boris Johnson mentioned that he wants all diesel vehicles and petrol vehicles to be sort of gone, or probably not made in about 10 years. Well,
yes,
it's going to take 20, 30, 40 years before everyone's got electric vehicle, because the amount of commodities that are unavailable due to the demand. So, I suppose the biggest challenge is trying to find these world-class, or not even necessarily world-class deposits, but significant deposits in copper, for instance.
Absolutely.
So, I think the industry's going to start picking up over the coming years and for the foreseeable future. So
we need great graduates, and we need better engagement with between the mining companies and the schools. And we can deliver, and we can achieve. And we can dispense with those challenges. That's what the mining industry has done time and time again.
Yes, certainly. Really appreciate your time, Michael. If our audience wants to reach out to you, how can they go about doing that? Are you on any social media at all?
We're on Instagram, we're on YouTube, we're on LinkedIn, and of course we've got a website. So I'm always happy to have a chat, Rob.
Yeah, no worries. And we can put all these in the show notes anyway below. Really appreciate your time, Michael. Really thank you for obviously providing this content around, especially around, I suppose, graduates, degrees, universities, and what's happening in the WA market, and with yourself. So I really appreciate your time. And thank you, audience. Thank you for listening. Really appreciate if you can share this episode with people in the industry, even people outside of the industry as well. If they want to know about mining or understand about mining, appreciate if you can share this episode with them, because then they might start to understand what mining is. So please keep sharing these episodes, and until next time, happy mining.